Have you ever wondered why some country borders are straight lines, or why Brazil speaks Portuguese while Mexico speaks Spanish? The answer lies in the story of colonialism. This is a story of adventure and discovery, but also of pain and injustice. Colonialism shaped nations, languages, and the challenges we face today. It's not just history, it's the foundation of our modern world. The wealth of some nations was built on the resources and labor of others, creating inequalities that persist. Borders drawn centuries ago still divide communities and fuel conflict. Colonialism is a human story, of powerful rulers, explorers, and millions whose lives were changed forever. We'll see how European kingdoms became empires, how the slave trade unfolded, and how people fought for freedom. This story is difficult, but essential to understanding our world and building a more just future. Let's begin our journey, uncovering how a process that started over 500 years ago still shapes our lives. The story of colonialism is, in many ways, the story of the modern world itself. What is colonialism? It's when one country takes control of another land and its people, often sending settlers and imposing new governments. The goal: power and profit. Colonizers extract resources, gold, rubber, cotton, to enrich themselves. Colonialism isn't new. Empires like Rome and China once ruled vast territories, but from the 15th century, European colonialism became global, driven by economic ambition and justified by claims of superiority. Imperialism is the idea. Colonialism is the practice. Colonizers claimed they brought progress, but in reality they exploited and oppressed. The relationship was never equal. Colonizers held power, locals were marginalized. Traditional ways of life were disrupted, lands seized, and people forced into harsh labor. This imbalance of power is key to understanding colonialism's impact. It created deep inequalities that still affect millions today. To grasp our world's challenges, we must understand this history. Modern colonialism began in the 15th century, during the Age of Exploration. Europeans sought new sea routes to Asia, hoping to bypass dangerous land routes and gain direct access to riches. Portugal led the way, exploring Africa's coast and establishing trading posts for gold, ivory, and slaves. Bartolomeu Dias rounded Africa's tip in 1488. Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498, opening new trade routes. Spain looked west. Columbus, funded by Spanish monarchs, sailed across the Atlantic in 1492 and landed in the Americas. This discovery opened the door for Spain to conquer powerful civilizations and build a vast empire. Soon, England, France, and the Netherlands joined the race, competing for land and resources. European empires expanded rapidly, claiming entire continents. What began as a search for trade routes became a global rush to conquer and colonize. The Age of Exploration set the stage for centuries of conflict and exploitation. The world map and millions of lives would never be the same. This was the dawn of global colonial empires. Colonizing the Americas created a huge demand for labor on plantations. Indigenous peoples were forced to work, but millions died from disease and brutality. Europeans turned to Africa, launching the Transatlantic slave trade, a system of forced migration and unimaginable cruelty. For over 400 years, millions of Africans were captured, sold, and shipped across the Atlantic in horrific conditions. The Middle Passage killed up to 2 million people before they even reached the Americas. Survivors were sold as property, families torn apart and forced to work under constant threat of violence. Despite this, enslaved people resisted, preserving culture, rebelling, and fighting for freedom. The slave trade devastated Africa, enriched Europe, and built the economies of the Americas. It introduced race-based slavery and racism, leaving scars that persist today. The legacy of this brutal system still shapes societies around the world. For centuries, Europeans traded along Africa's coasts, but the interior remained independent. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. Europe needed Africa's resources and new markets. This led to the scramble for Africa. In 1884, European powers met at the Berlin Conference to divide the continent, without a single African present. Borders were drawn with no regard for local cultures, splitting communities and sowing seeds of future conflict. By 1914, nearly all of Africa was colonized. Britain and France claimed the largest territories, while Belgium, Germany, and others took their share. The Congo Free State, ruled by Belgium's King Leopold II, became infamous for its brutality and exploitation. Colonizers imposed their laws, languages, and economies, using force to crush resistance. Infrastructure like railways served only to extract resources for Europe. Africans were taxed and forced into low-wage labor. Colonial rule destroyed old ways of life and imposed a new order that Africa still struggles to overcome. The scars of this division remain visible today. As Africa was divided, European powers tightened their grip on Asia. Early trading posts grew into full colonial rule by the 19th century, as Britain, France, and the Netherlands conquered vast territories. India became the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, ruled first by the East India Company, then directly by Britain after 1857. British rule exploited India's resources and people, causing famines and draining wealth. France colonized Indochina, the Dutch took Indonesia, the US seized the Philippines. China, never fully colonized, was forced into unequal treaties, losing control over trade and key ports. Colonial rule disrupted societies, introduced new borders, and created Western-educated elites. Economies were shaped to benefit Europe, hindering local development. Resentment grew, fueling powerful independence movements in the 20th century. The impact of colonization in Asia was profound and lasting. Colonized peoples never simply accepted their fate, they resisted in ways big and small. Early rebellions were often crushed, but the spirit of freedom endured. After World War II, weakened European powers faced growing demands for independence. The global climate shifted, self-determination became a rallying cry, and new leaders emerged. Mahatma Gandhi led India's non-violent struggle, inspiring movements worldwide. Elsewhere, independence came through violent conflict, like in Algeria and Vietnam. Between the 1940s and 1970s, a wave of decolonization swept Asia and Africa. Dozens of new nations were born, finally free to govern themselves. Independence brought hope, but also the challenge of building stable, prosperous countries from the wreckage of colonialism. The struggle for true freedom was only beginning. Independence didn't erase colonialism's effects. New nations faced huge challenges rooted in their colonial past. Borders drawn by Europeans forced together diverse groups, fueling instability and conflict. Colonial economies focused on exporting raw materials, leaving countries dependent and underdeveloped. Many remain tied to former colonizers for trade and investment, trapped in cycles of poverty and inequality. European languages, religions, and education systems created identity crises and social divides. Racist ideas used to justify colonialism left deep scars, contributing to ongoing discrimination. Today, debates rage over reparations, returning stolen artifacts, and reclaiming culture. The legacy of colonialism shapes global inequalities and social tensions. Understanding this history is crucial to addressing today's challenges. The past is never truly past, it lives on in our world. Our journey through colonialism reveals how centuries-old events still shape our world. The quest for trade routes grew into empires, causing suffering and resistance. Colonialism's legacy explains modern poverty, conflict, and inequality. Borders drawn long ago still spark disputes. Economic systems built for extraction fuel global divides. This history teaches us about power, justice, and the dangers of believing in superiority. Stories of resistance inspire us to fight for freedom and dignity. Confronting the past helps us heal and build a fairer future. We must challenge racism and support a more just global system. Colonialism is a shared human story. Understanding it brings us closer to justice for all. By learning from history, we can write a new chapter based on respect and equality.